Hey, we're back with John Arena and Brian Spangler, our two Yodas of dough. I'll call them the dough Yodas or the pizza Yodas, and I think since the plural of Yoda is Yodi, so there are two dough Yodis, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how they've elevated their pizzas over the years. We've heard John's story, the evolution of a 55-year journey in pizza. And Brian, not as long, but certainly a journey that came in from another angle through bread. You've both gotten to a place of excellence, clearly not just something that I say, but something that the critics say, that your fans say. Everybody knows that you guys are, among the elite of pizzerias, and there's got to be a reason for that. There's something you're doing and that that makes a difference. And I think that's why people want to be part of our tinkering with your dough, workshops that we do. Is they want to hear what it is you've learned that you could share with them so that they can also elevate theirs. And this is not just for professional pizza operators, but for home bakers, because as we know, home cooks and home bakers all want to be able to do what the pros do, and they're loving it, and they're turning their kitchens into little mini restaurants. So why don't we jump back to John for a second? And John, if you could talk a little bit about that transition that you made from being sort of out of the New York style of pizza into something that is now Metro Pizza, which really celebrates styles from all over the country, and maybe bring us up to date on that, and perhaps talk about some of the dough tweaks and things that you've learned that have improved the quality of your pizzas.
Okay, well, first of all, the first thing is you have to have some sort of an ideal. I think the quest starts with a vision. It starts with having some idea in your mind of where you would like to be, and that changes over time. Also, as you walk this path, the view changes. You get to a certain point that you thought was going to be the end game, and you get there and you look at it and you go, "Wow, there's something beyond this. From this vantage point, I can see something else," and that takes you further and further along. It's like looking up at a mountain. If you're at the bottom of the mountain and you're looking up, you don't see the top of the mountain. You see what you think is the top of the mountain, and then you walk to that point and you go, "Wow, there's something else here." So for me, that was the starting point, and a lot of it started with understanding that what we do is a craft and not just a job. It's an avocation. I think the really great pizza makers feel that they're called to be pizza makers. The great bread bakers are called to be bread bakers, and you have to approach it each day as if it's an opportunity to express who you are at that given moment. So we're getting into Yoda territory. I know that, but I think
but that's what it's about, and that is the difference. It's such a difference maker, because we always say on Pizza Quest that we're celebrating artisanship wherever we find it. And when you talk about craft, you're really talking about that artisan spirit, and it seems to be a difference maker for you and others as how to stay in the game this long for it to be fresh and exciting every time you go back into the shop.
I think to make it fresh and exciting, every time you touch a dough ball, and I'm sure this is true of Brian as well, every time you pick up a dough ball, you're a different person. You're touching that dough from the perspective of a person, of who you are right at that given moment. And that's changing all the time because you're the sum total of all your experiences. So the next time I pick up a dough ball, I'm the person that I am at that given moment. 10 minutes later, I'm somebody else. The worst thing that somebody can say to me is, "Wow, your pizza hasn't changed in 1980. I've been coming here for 40 years and it's unchanged. It's remarkable." And it's like, really? I haven't gotten any better? I haven't learned anything in 40 years? If that's the case, you failed. I think there's always an opportunity to make it better. There's always an opportunity to learn something new just from handling the dough, just how your hands work, where you're at that given moment in your life, what you've experienced up until that moment that you took that dough out of the tray. If you're open to that, it never gets old. It never gets tired. And you're always looking to improve it. And I mean, I think this is really the golden age of pizza.
Yeah.
There were no Brian Spanglers 50 years ago. There were guys doing direct mix method, throwing a bunch of stuff in a bowl, pushing the button, and then sitting down and playing poker for a few minutes before the dough, and then deciding to come back to their batch and cut it and roll it. I think what's really happened that's a big change for us now is, in the past, pizza makers were dealing with the conditions that existed and not really controlling the conditions. You used the oven that was available to you. You used the mixer that was available. You used the flour that was available in your region. And I think that now there's endless conscious choices that can be made. You can have a vision of what you want your ideal pizza to be. Let's face it, 60 years ago, with the exception of coal-fired versus gas-fired, most of the pizzas in New York were pretty much the same. Most of the Chicago pizza was pretty much the same. There were not all these choices. If it was artisanship, it was accidental artisanship.
Yeah.
Now it's conscious choices throughout every decision, for equipment, technique, ingredients. The three major components of making a great pizza are all conscious choices that are not subject to regionality.
When did you kind of make that flip from the idea of like measuring to the line in the bucket to using scales and getting precision and ratios and bringing a little bit of the dough science into your craft?
I think that started by the time we had our second location. We were forced to be more precise.
Which was about when?
1985.
Oh, so that's still quite a while back. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was still, you were still ahead of the curve in that regard, because prior to that, most people, not even bread bakers, thought much about ratios and weights. They all talked about scoops and pounds and buckets.
Yeah, we realized that wasn't working because they were filling the bucket up to a line, and their version of up to the line and my version of up to the line were completely different. And when we had that second location, certainly you're making adjustments on the fly when you're the only guy making the dough. When you go to location number 2, things change. So that was really the beginning. By 1985, 1986, we were starting to accurately measure. We weren't doing longer fermentation. We were doing like a 2-day, 1 to 2 day fermentation, and then we started to realize, like, wow, if we had leftover dough from on day 3, it was better. It was easier to work. It had better texture. It was browning better. What's going on here? So then that became, because of my dad's input, it was like, okay, so if it's better, why is it better? What's going on here?
That's the big question. And you kind of stumbled into this whole notion of using pre-fermented dough to be a dough improver without even knowing really the science behind it, but intuitively it just seemed right.
Right. I mean, if you're there every day and you're watching every pizza that comes out of the oven, which is important, to actually be there on the line handling the dough. I'm always amazed when I hear about pizza makers that say, "Oh, I've been doing this 10 years. I don't make pizzas anymore. That got old." It's like, I can't wait to get into the pizzeria and make pizzas every day.
Well, it sounds like because for you it's still a discovery process. You're still looking for how to make it better and better. Well, what about let's throw it to Brian for a second and see kind of how you came into that, because you, as an artisan baker and part of the early days of the Bread Bakers Guild of America, where bread science really started to come into the American vocabulary, you started in your pizza world already understanding about ratios and weights. So how did you manage to kind of evolve your dough?
Well, anybody who cares, people always ask me, like, what's so special about your pizzeria or your pizza? And I always tell them it's me, because I care. And
that's it.
And the floor is constantly moving. Just because I use one particular flour doesn't mean it's going to react, from lot to lot. It's not all the same grain coming from the same farm. There's a different person running the roller mill. So it could be starch damage that season, depending on where that grain's coming from. There's even like the cheese with grande cheese, which we use, the low moisture level. That moisture level is constantly changing, and it's like dancing. It's when we talk about this topic of tweaking your dough, I'm always tweaking because everything is constantly changing. But it's also being able to identify, and some of my employees think I'm crazy. I'm like, what's it telling you? Is it talking to you?
Yeah.
Like, what? I'm like, it's telling you what it wants and what it doesn't want, and you need to be more aware. Why is it tight today? And I'm like, I don't know. Could have been that you overmixed. It could have been, you know, that the protease enzymes activity on this new lot of flour is a little lower. Could be that we're having low barometric pressure today versus, you know, being dry and cold the previous day. So it's identifying from experience but also caring to constantly move with all the changes that are happening on a daily basis.
And that's, you hit on something that Chris Bianco talks about a lot too. When I interviewed him for American Pie years ago, that was probably the most important line in the whole book, was when I asked him what it was about his pizzas that made them different or better than everybody else's, and what could he teach people, you know, on how to do it better. And he said, I can teach them tricks and tips and all. He said, but I can't teach them to care as much as I care.
Right.
And he said, if I found somebody who cared as much as I care, I could make them a great pizza maker. And, you know, and you're saying the same thing. You came into it with this sort of notion of and an intuition of how to care about this. And John is saying the same thing. I mean, these are the common principles, more than just the science and the doing it every day is this degree of caring. And I think that's the real artisan spirit that we've been, you know, trying to kind of reach for and share with all the people who are watching us today.
It's not,
yeah,
it's not for caring, it's also observing. If you care, you're obviously always observing.
Well, we could even change the name of this workshop from tinkering with your dough to listening to your dough.
Listening.
Because what you just said was that the dough is telling you what it needs, and you just got to know how to hear it.
Right. And that's the reason why over the years I've been experimenting, and, you know, with John as well, different flours. Sometimes, like, I'm always, you know, you're always trying to, like, improve what it is you're doing, the final product. I call it the brass ring. Like, that's, you know, we're always reaching up for this one ideal that we created in our mind of what, you know, we want our pizza to be, and it's an expression of us. But in the meanwhile, it's always saying, like, well, it can always be better, and you can always learn, and you can always improve. And it's just rolling through the punches and identifying and listening and just observing. The old classic. Remember, in the baking world, there would be, you see us all these students that'd be like, "How do you know when it's ready?" And it's like, well, from experience and from failure. The failure is the best teacher. But then there's also that point where you have what we call the baker's touch, right? When you touch it, you know exactly, you know, it's like, yeah, not ready. How do you know? I'm like, I've been doing this a while. You know?
Well, I think John has spoken to this really beautifully and poetically. John, can you hold your hands up for us for a second and tell us a little bit about these hands?
Okay. Everything that we do comes from our hearts, through our arms, into our hands, and into the food. And that's where the magic is. And that's why the idea of secrecy is so ludicrous, so ridiculous. It's because, you know, as Brian said, you can't teach people to care. You know, if they do care, then welcome to the club. Join us. Let's hold hands and do this together. Right. If they don't care, it's not going to matter what formula you give them, what ratios you give them, what magic mixer you give them. None of that's going to make a difference. You know, and people are always asking me, well, how come you give away formulas? You know, you tell people what you're doing. You're not hiding that. You're not secretive like the old school guys. It's like, because it doesn't matter if I tell you what I'm doing. If you don't care, you're not going to do it anyway. And if you do care, you're going to find out on your own.
Right.
Yeah. So why not have this exchange of ideas and exchange of information that pushes us further along? You know, we've talked about this before, that, you know, if our quest is a relay race, when somebody hands you the torch, you don't run in place. You run forward and you hand it to somebody else.
Right. And
that's how progress is made.
And I think that's been one of the beautiful things we're seeing in the pizza community, and it's coming out more and more even now during this crisis period. The way people are coming together, sharing. I think we're in a new era where it's not about everybody holding their own turf, but it's really about the sense of community. And so we're going to take a little break here, but when we come back, I want to continue and explore this with you guys one more segment, and talk a little bit about two things. One, you know, kind of further along about sort of this community aspect of where things are going, and also if you could tell us a little bit about how you're each navigating through this current coronavirus period and how you're keeping your business going, because this is something that everybody's struggling with right now, and we'd love to hear what you guys have figured out and how to stay viable and keep the cash flow happening as well.